campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 1st Congressional District Republican Primary Candidate Debate.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rod Arquette, talk radio host for KNRS 105 FM. It is my pleasure this afternoon to moderate this debate at the invitation of the Utah Debate Commission. Now, this event, held live on June 2nd, is part of the Utah Debate Commission's work to educate voters and encourage the civil exchange of ideas. Freedom of expression is one of the most important founding principles of this great country, and the exchange of ideas, not violence, allows the country to move forward and to solve many of the issues we face today. Now, if you're watching or listening live, we encourage your reaction and questions on social media using the hashtags UTDebate and Listen, Learn, Vote. We are on the campus of the University of Utah, broadcasting live from the Dolores Story Eccles Broadcasting Center, where we are holding the debate between the 4 Republican candidates, primary candidates in Utah's 1st Congressional District. We invite you now, for the safety of all involved in the debate process this afternoon, we are adhering to the COVID-19 social distancing guidelines, and there is no studio audience this afternoon. Today, we will hear from 4 candidates: Kerry Gibson, Blake Moore, Bob Stevenson, and Katie Witt. Today's questions will be posed by myself, university students, members of the news media, and the listening and viewing audience participating on social media. Now, last week, a random drawing was held, determined that Mr. Bob Stevenson will get the initial response to the first question. We'll alternate who answers first on the remaining questions. Let's get right to the questions as we begin the exchange this afternoon. To all you candidates, it's very important that every voter knows something personal about each of you. There will not be a rebuttal for this, by the way. Question, Mr. Stevenson, what uniquely qualifies you to represent Utah's 1st Congressional District?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Rod. Just real quick, I've been married 40 plus years, have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. I think the things that makes me uniquely is my background. On my completion of graduation from Weber State University, I had the opportunity to actually teach school for 2 years. During that period of time, I worked on a master's degree at Utah State in distributive education. I did not finish the degree because I left and went to work for Nestle, if you're familiar with them, worked for them for 30 plus years. During this period of time, I had the opportunity to serve for 3 terms on the Layton City Council. From there, I was elected mayor twice of Layton, went on and presently serving as a Davis County Commissioner. I've had the opportunity throughout that period of time to serve on numerous boards. One has been quite a bit of involvement with Hill Air Force Base, serving on the Utah Defense Alliance, along with the CLP programs, one at a national level at the AFMC and also at the base. There are a number of other boards I've been dealing with, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Mrs. Witt.
Thank you. Well, the reason why I'm running is when I saw AOC get elected in 2018, I'm like, how can somebody who's running on socialist principles have a seat in the Congress of the United States? And that's really what got me to run. I am pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Trump, but most importantly, I'm pro-you. I will work tirelessly to preserve freedom, expand opportunity, reignite patriotism. My vision for CD1 is that families and businesses can live where they want to live, fully participate in the worldwide economy, have their kids get a world-class education right from the kitchen table, and be able to get great health care no matter where you live. I am dedicated to reopening America. It is time to get back to work. Thank you.
Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Rod. My sweet wife, Katrina, and I have raised our 6 children on our family farm in western Weber County. I've been a small business owner and a farmer all my life. As a county commissioner, I saw firsthand federal overreach into our local municipalities. As a state representative, I fought for issues like our right to bear arms and the right to life. As the Utah Agriculture Commissioner, I had the opportunity to stand with farmers and ranchers as they battled the challenges that they face every day as they provide food and fiber for a hungry and grateful nation. Times change, but our values don't have to. Now is not the time for on-the-job training. If we are going to balance the budget, protect Hill Air Force Base, have a prominent seat at the table in our public lands debate, and protect our values and constitutional rights, we're going to need a proven conservative with a record to back it up.
And Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance to be on the stage with everybody today. We've been behind Zoom far too long. This has been a nice break. Everybody agrees that Washington is broken. I'm trying to break that mold. I'm challenging the notion that we need the next political promotion, then that's what the job of Congress needs. I believe the job of Congress is to solve complex problems and energize those around us. This election is the most important of our time. And I have the right experience to solve the issues that are facing our country. I'm the candidate. I've served our country at the federal level, both in Washington, D.C. and abroad. I've had relevant private sector experience that not only helps me help businesses grow, solve complex problems, but also earn real policy chops in the work that I've done. When I decided to run, we were talking about the balanced budget. And the last few months have shown us how quickly things can change and why we need such diverse leadership in Congress.
Our next question of the debate this afternoon comes from a member of the media. Brian Malahy has a question from KUTV Channel 2, and the first to respond will be Mrs. Witt.
People from many quarters condemn the killing of George Floyd and understand concerns over racism. However, is it your opinion that actors in the violent Salt Lake City demonstration who burned cars, broke windows, clashed with police, and damaged property are domestic terrorists? And if so, what more should the federal government do to hold them accountable?
Mrs. Witt.
Thank you. You know, when I saw the video footage of what happened to George Floyd, I was shaken and appalled. And I know many others in our nation have been as well. It brought me back to a time when I was an exchange student in South Africa. I was there from 1989 to 1990, and they had institutional government-sponsored racism. And while I was there, I also got to see the hope and energy that was surrounded the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. And I think as looking back on that time, people strive for equality. It is a human right, and we need to continue to work in this nation to have equality. And because of that, my commitment to equality, I joined the NAACP several years ago because I think we need to come together as a nation to work as brothers and sisters to solve this problem. We've put it off on just one segment of the population for far too long. I have taken a firm stand, supporting our First Amendment rights to peaceably assemble, and we need to continue to peaceably assemble. However, when groups such as Antifa infiltrate into these peaceful assemblies, it is the government's right and responsibility to give protection to property and lives. I support our local law enforcement in order to do that and condemn all the violence that has been done, which mitigates, undercuts the peaceful protests.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, let me agree with the mayor and unequivocally state that the murder of George Floyd was wrong, and it should never happen in our country. It should never happen in a free society. We all believe in the rule of law and how important that is to a civil society. And so I'm grateful that due process will take its course and that the individuals who perpetrated this act will be brought to justice. Now, that being said, I want to say how much I appreciate the hundreds and thousands of really, really good decisions that are made every single day on behalf of a majority of our law enforcement officers. I am so grateful for them. I was proud as I watched our boys in brown and blue and everything else on Saturday night as they stood their ground, were spit on, called names, and called every vile thing in the book. As they stood, had respectful conversations, and executed the goal of keeping us and our property safe. I'm grateful that they protected our Capitol building. I'm grateful that they protected our landmarks and they protected life and liberty. And yes, it is wrong when individuals take a protest that is intended to be peaceful and turn it into something different. It's terribly wrong. And what we saw on Saturday was unacceptable. My belief and my hope is that the rule of law will be applied in those cases as well, and that those who crossed the line and did things that were clearly inappropriate will have the opportunity to be brought to justice through that same due process that we would allow anyone else. That is the constitutional principle here, that of due process and the rule of law. If we follow those constitutional principles, we can be proud of where we live and the fact that we are all Americans.
Mr. Moore, 2 minutes.
In times like this, it's important to turn to those that are closest to the situation. And last Thursday, I had an experience where I saw a post of a good friend of mine, former Ogden Police Department, now he's with Unified, where he made it very clear on Thursday. He said, there's unrest in Minneapolis because an officer dishonored the badge. Well, we lost a fallen officer today in Ogden, Utah. Wasn't his colleague, it had been a while, but in that officer, Nathan Lyday, was only 15 months on the job. To see that happen, that's one of the tragedies of the last few days is their family hasn't had a chance to mourn. I've been so impressed with the leadership in Ogden, Mayor Caldwell, bringing the community together to have a very productive protest and be able to have that time and that healing to be able to start, because absolutely what happened with George Floyd was a tragedy, and that officer needs to face the full extent of the law, and I'm glad to see that process takes place. We need to stop the destruction. We need to stop the anarchy that's happening in our cities. It's plain and simple. We have to take measures to avoid that. That takes away from the peaceful protest process that's so important for everybody to be able to share their message and to be able to get their point across. But what can we do at the federal level? Over-communicate support for the Floyd family and this situation. Get specific about how we can support our police officers and how we can support our police force to help them do the job that they need to do to keep public safety, but also, what comprehensive training do we need to be able to allow them to be able to root out bad actors? Nobody, our officers and the good men and women fighting in this cause, they hate the situation as much as everybody because it brings bad name on the good work that they do. And even at the federal level, President Trump, Senator Lee, we're working on prison reform. This is the time to act on that type of stuff and criminal justice reform with celebrities that are working on this, and that's a real opportunity here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes. Our Constitution allows us to have peaceful demonstrations. It's one of the wonderful things that the forefathers put in place to basically help all of us. Any type of violence, whether it's domestic, whether it's within police brutality or on the streets with what has taken place here, is absolutely atrocious and is something that we should not accept in this country at all. I believe there is close to 800,000 sworn officers across this country. We have to realize that probably 99.9% of those people are awful, wonderful people who are doing their job the way they're supposed to. One of the things that took place that night, referring to your question now, is that I believe there were 40-plus people who were arrested, and they were actually brought to the Davis County Jail. We processed them there in Davis County. We tried to get them away from the Salt Lake and the situation down there, and bring them out to Davis County to get this handled better. I do believe that the things that we have to look at is that, one, we have to make sure that we are training people. We have to make sure that we're teaching them. I know when I served as mayor of Layton City, a very large city, and we had some incidences that we had to work with our police as far as some corrective actions, and those types of things all comes down to management and trying to train people the proper way. I think that we also have to work very closely as far as the federal government goes, is possibly to make programs available that can help aid these local agencies to be able to put in place the opportunity to not only train with physical type things and also basically anger management and how to work with people and to be able to convince people, as has been commented on earlier, was the aspect that the police, as they stood line and they had people throwing things at them and spitting on them, and also the name calling, that these people were able to keep their composure and stay together. This is the type of thing that we have to continue to do and be able to protect everyone as far as it goes. We love our police, we love what they do, and we have to be there for them and give them the proper training.
On a related matter, you mentioned police. All of you have brought that up in your remarks today. In the last 24 hours, 3 police officers in this country have been shot during these events, 1 in the head, another one has been run over. In a meeting yesterday with the governors, the president said it is time to dominate, time to take charge, and he said he will call the military if, in fact, that is necessary. Would you support the president in that endeavor? 1 minute, Mr. Gibson.
Not in my America. We don't need the military of the United States of America in Salt Lake City, Utah. We have a tremendous police force. I am grateful for these individuals. One of them standing on the steps of the Capitol just the other day. 2 of them I know personally very, very well. One was my brother-in-law, Jared Hayes. One is a dear friend, Weston Minton. We have the resources to handle this within the state of Utah. We don't need the federal government coming in and telling us exactly how we need to do these types of things. This concept, and I hope we can talk about this later in the debate, this concept of federalism is critically important, where states have the opportunities and the willingness and the ability to handle a lot of our own challenges. Let's have the federal government take care of defending our borders and defending our nation, and let's have the state government take care of domestic matters within our state lines.
Mr. Moore, you have 1 minute. Do you support the idea?
Not in our country.
Do you support the idea of using the military right now?
Yeah, not in our country, not in our state. I love that Kerry's brought up federalism. It is at the root of so many issues, and I think we're going to be talking about a lot more of that today. Our responses to these situations are best done at the local level, where we know exactly what's going on. We have on-the-ground information, and the ability and the autonomy for our local decision makers to be able to make those decisions is enormously important. Utah can thrive here. Utah can lead here. Utah can show the country how we go about doing this in a very peaceful and proper way to address that. So that's plain and simple. That's at the root of so many different things, and we'll talk about it as it relates to healthcare and education and so many different things. But specifically to that, we don't need that type of escalation right now to make sure that we have our public safety in order.
Thank you. Mr. Stevenson.
Sure. One of the things that took place on this incident is I think there were 34 sworn officers from Davis County that came in to aid the Salt Lake County and Salt Lake Police, and I'm sure there were other agencies that stepped forward also. I do believe that there could be at times, depending upon the situation, that there may need to be help called in, and this is part of help protect. One of the things that we have in this state and every state is the National Guard. That is a state agency that basically is there that can be called out by the governor, who can come in and help what needs to be, especially if there's things that need to be put down because of the numbers. We cannot ever forget that we have to be there to aid these policing factors that we have. And if we do not have enough people to support them against the perpetrators, we have to bring in help to help them. And in that case, I think that we have to be willing to step forward and supply that help.
Mrs. Witt.
Yeah, I think that the point that President Trump was making is that we need to have law and order in our communities. And I think here in Utah, we're doing a very good job at that. And I really applaud all those who have worked together. And I have to also give kudos to the protesters themselves to be willing to work within the constraints that are established. However, when it comes to Antifa, if state governments are not taking care of that problem, I support President Trump in taking a proactive stance. I don't see it happening here in Utah, but I believe that they are a terrorist organization and they need to be dealt with as such.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to another issue that this country is trying to deal with. We've dealt with this for the past 8 to 10 weeks, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. As a country tries to find a balance between the need for public health and the return to a stronger economy, Washington, of course, is wrestling with the idea of a fourth recovery plan. Do you see need for more economic incentives coming out of Washington? You'll each have 2 minutes, and we begin with Mr. Moore.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's briefly highlight what we've done well. Administration took quick action We've put pressure on the World Health Organization to be more transparent in what they're doing. Congress passed the CARES Act. We look at what we can improve, and this gets to what is forthcoming here in July. The CARES Act had immediate side effects. We need to fix legislation in July. We need legislation in July to fix what we did in April, and that is far too fast for those types of issues to flare up. And what I'm speaking specifically to is unemployment benefits have now incentivized folks not to go back to work. We've all heard anecdotes of small business owners. We've got people, trying to avoid going back to work because of, they're going to make more based off of their unemployment benefits. Like, we can't have that type of equation in our responses to legislation. The Payment Protection Plan, let's call it PPP. Our banks have done an incredible job in the state. In fact, they've been lauded as some of the best in the country, but it simply wasn't funded. And now we have companies that are terrified to use it in some cases for the liability reasons that are associated with it. All of that needed to be thought of prior to passing this type of legislation. This is something that I'm passionate about. The last 10 years of my career, had I worked with a client, looked at the information, seen looked ahead to what was forthcoming, and create a plan that had that immediate side effects, I would have been fired. We need to make sure that we have smart decision makers that are thoughtful about what negative externalities can come out of these types of policies right away and address that. Now, we're looking at, there's two different types of responses that are tossed around right now. Both of them incentivize work. One's a tax break. One of them is going to be an incentive plan. Whatever we end up choosing to do, we cannot continue to not incentivize people to get back to work and doing that. But we cannot be back here in what's another 3 months from that, October, trying to fix the same thing again.
Mr. Stevenson, what about the need for another incentive package or recovery package?
Yes, first of all, I do believe that what took place, they were a little bit too quick. I don't think they thought through this enough to realize that there were actually a lot of businesses that never did close down. And there have been businesses that have been very successful through this, but they still qualified for money, and they applied for money, and they've been able to utilize that money as long as they put it into their overhead and into their employees and that. And I think there were others that went without. We know that a lot of big business received the dollars, and a lot of the small businesses did not, and they're the ones that need it more than anyone, because they're the ones that are not prepared, do not have the backup, and they need to be able to have the help. And I think that we made a mistake as far as that goes. I think the other thing too that we have to look at on this is that the fourth phase is what the Democrats have presented a couple of weeks ago, 1,800-page bill that basically was throwing another $3 trillion into the spending as far as this goes. There was a lot of pork that was involved in it, kind of trying to make everybody happy. That is not what we need. There is absolutely, that type of spending is crazy. When we deal with a budget to where we have revenues coming into this country of about $3.5 trillion, and we're turning around and taking $3 trillion and throwing it against phase 4 thing, that's craziness. That is poor judgment on the elected people, and I do believe that the Republicans is going to vote that down and stop that from happening. Just to give you a quick example of it, Davis County, we actually sat in a meeting this morning, and we have coming into Davis County to be able to utilize is about $30 million. Some of the things that we will look at that, because there are strict requirements we have to do. But one of the things that we should be able to do with these dollars is to prepare for the future with this type of pandemic or anything else happening. But most important is that we have the ability to start supporting these small businesses. And that is where the majority of these monies will go, is to, in grant programs, to make sure we keep this economy going and get it back to where it needs to be.
Katie Witt, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think that I've probably taken a stronger stance than anybody on reopening America. I feel very strongly that we need to trust individuals to make good decisions for themselves and their families. We don't need a fourth phase. We need to let people get back to work. And I think that it was a mistake in retrospect to force everybody to close down. And you can see the impact as we see the angst and the stress that our nation has gone through over the past several months. It is time to reopen America. We have to let people earn a living. I was talking to a restaurant owner from Logan, and he is actually spending more money than he's making just trying to stay open. He has to spend $2,000 a month on to-go packaging, and he's spending money on gas to deliver food. He's, and yet he is committed to staying open and serving the people of his community. I think it was a mistake. And if we look forward, if we have something of this nature come up in 5 years, 10 years, there is no way that we're going to have the wherewithal to mount the same response as we have for this. I think what you have to do is you have to have something that is sustainable. This is not sustainable. This was a mistake. We've got to let people get back to work.
All right, yes, Mr. Stevenson, you have a rebuttal, yes.
So, Mayor Witt, the question I have for you is that we at the county have been very good to turn around and allow the mayors on a weekly basis to give input and tell us how they think it should be. A few weeks ago, you took a stand about not opening up the pickleball courts. You called a meeting with the mayors, you had a number of them get together, and you pushed for that not to happen because you felt it was not time to open pickleball courts, which some of the mayors pushed back, and they were open. The county was supportive of opening if they wanted to under certain requirements. My question to you is, how can you turn around and fight to stop pickleball courts and within 10 days be basically trying to put on a party in your park, which is breaking the rules of what the state order was?
Yeah.
Yes, you may.
First of all, I feel that I was upholding my oath of office to support freedom of assembly. When it comes to the pickleball courts, I love pickleball. And also, pickleball is the sport of Kaysville. So I love pickleball. And we were following direction from the county to close the pickleball courts in the first place. I wanted to open them, but as a group, the mayors wanted to do whatever was consistent. So I went along with what the mayors wanted to do.
All right, I want to go to Mr. Gibson.
That said, let the carnage begin.
Yes. Let's go to Mr. Gibson. You have 2 minutes to respond to the idea of another incentive package.
Well, I want to go back to the principle here of small business and how it is absolutely essential to our economy. It's the backbone of our economy. Small business, depending on how you define it, by some estimates, is up to 80% of the jobs in this state. And they have been crippled. They have absolutely been crippled by this challenge. Not only the crisis itself, but the response to the crisis. Now, why is that important? Well, it's because it's good people. It's the economy that keeps us strong. It's exactly the thing that puts money in the treasury so that we can combat these issues in the future. When those businesses are not succeeding, they have no way of contributing. They want to contribute. So here's the problem. As much as we want to help those small businesses right now, here's the crisis. The crisis is that we are woefully unprepared from a fiscal perspective. The fact of the matter is that we cannot continue on our course of unsustainable financial spending in Washington, D.C. When we're already nearing $26 trillion in debt and our deficit is out of control, no wonder we can't spend $4 trillion on a response package. It's impossible. We can't continue to kick the can down the road in a way that hinders and inhibits our own children from being able to function in the future. That's not what our parents did for us. They came into this valley, our forefathers, they came into this valley and built stuff for us and paved the way for us to succeed. What we're doing is we're passing the buck. We're kicking the can down the road to someone else who can't do it on their own. We are going to burden them in a way that they'll never be able to recover because of the fact that we have made unsustainable choices in the past. That is the crisis facing Congress right now. We will never be able to respond to these or other national security issues until we get our budget under control, until we make good decisions with our finances from the beginning.
Well, that's on a related topic, of course. Everybody is saying, you know, they hear these numbers, they're almost unfathomable for people to really understand. You know, if we're going to do a stimulus package or with the debt that you just brought up, Mr. Gibson, how do we pay for this? How does this country get back to near a balanced budget if that is all possible? 2 minutes, Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, there is no question that the amount of dollars that are there is something that how to overcome that is almost impossible. One of the things I think that we do have to do is become more efficient. One of the things when I was mayor of Layton that we did is we looked at the efficiency, we looked at our revenues and what we were doing to try to create dollars in the community, and we started putting some programs together, and actually after a couple of years actually lowered taxes twice on the property tax in Layton. I believe on a national level this is the same type of thing that we have to do. We have to turn around and look at some of these programs that are in place and start to make cuts in them, and we have to start to figure out how we can generate these dollars to be able to create that balance and working up to it. I do believe one of the first things that we should do, if we can get everyone to go along with it, is basically create a balanced budget. As I mentioned earlier, you know, we have revenues coming in of about $3.5 trillion in this country, yet our expenditures are $4.5 trillion. So we're every year just in that going in the hole $1 trillion. We got to bring those back together to where you've got equality as far as that goes. And I think that once we can try to get to that, that is when we can turn around and start to move to getting things paid back. The whole process is going to have to be changed.
All right. Mrs. Witt, what about the balanced budget, the debt this country is now having to bear? What do we do about it? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, we need to have a balanced budget amendment. I fully support a balanced budget amendment. It's far past time. Our states have to, this state lives by a balanced budget, and so do our communities. So it is time that the federal government live by the same rules, and our families have to live within these same constraints. I don't see how the federal government has gotten away with it for this long. The other thing that we need to do is we need to grow our economy. I feel that we are on the brink of a new frontier here in the United States. And the people who are going to lead us in this, they're the small business owners, they're the entrepreneurs, the innovators. I'm excited. I'm excited about the future. What we need to do to help these people is we got to get rid of the unnecessary rules and regulations that are hampering their innovations and their growth. I have to give credit to President Trump, who made it an issue that he was going to repeal at least 2 regulations for every one that he put in. In actuality, 7.5 regulations have been taken out for every one that has been put in. And I think you could feel it in our economy prior to coronavirus, that real optimism in our country and the ability for people to get stuff done. And that's what America is all about. The second thing we need to do, though, is we need to stop spending so much money. And how we do that is federal government needs to stay in its own lane. That's what gets us into this crisis, is that we want to play over here and over here and over there. Get back in your own lane, do what you're supposed to do, and stop touching everybody's stuff.
Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Rod. I stand before you today as a candidate who isn't going to ask you to trust me. I'm going to ask you to take a look at what I've done, and then you can decide what I believe because of that. I'm the only candidate on the stage who has state legislative experience. What that means is that I've been through several of these situations that we will face in Congress, that the next congressman will be faced with. When I entered the state legislature, the budget was flush. We had money. People were getting money for just about every project they wanted to get, and then all of a sudden in 2008, we hit a financial crisis and we were forced to make some tough decisions. We had to decide, are we going to do what the federal government did and just print money? Or are we going to deficit spend? No, we can't do that because we have the Constitution in place, the state Constitution that says we can't. And plus it went against our principles as members of the legislature and people who care about this state. And so we did what we should have done. We did what the federal government needs to do. We went through line by line, and as a budget committee chair at that time, I was in the room at the table actively participating, doing my part to make sure that our budget came into line with the new reality. And what we found is that there was a lot of pork. There was an awful lot of spending that really didn't have a reason to be there. I'm so proud to have been in that room and done that work. I've proven that it can be done. I've done it at the county level, I've done it at the state level, I've done it at my home, and I've done it in my own businesses. And we can't get away with the games that are played in Washington, D.C. in those areas. And so we need to take that same mentality, that same line of thinking, and the skill set, because it's not easy. Because every time that you come across an important project, it's somebody's project, right? And they're not going to want to see it go away. But the reality is they are tough decisions. I'm telling you right now, the easy decisions have been made in Washington, D.C. The tough ones that are the only ones left, and it's going to be tough, but we have to do it for the future of our country, for our children's future.
Mr. Moore, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Rod. This was one of the top reasons that I jumped into this race. Several years ago, before I had any inclination to run for this position, I read biographies from those that were involved, the architects of the 1997 budget deal. I think of that basically as political Cooperstown, if you will, the Hall of Fame of what they were able to accomplish. A GOP-led legislature working with a Democratic president cabinet to be able to come together and create a balanced budget. This is what we have to do now. And the reason I was so excited when I got in the race and was talking so much about this was because they did it then on the heels of significant economic growth, and they leveraged that economic growth to be able to go about do it. That went away a few weeks ago, and that's a travesty. And I agree with Kerry that when we have these disasters, whether it be natural disaster or something like this pandemic, we need to be able to come from a position of strength. So there is real motivation to be able to get to where we need to get to. That group of people, they had some of the best ideas. They took Coast Guard, for example. If you were out gallivanting out in the Florida Keys and you required Coast Guard to come and help you, you were responsible for some of that payment. Whether you could do it all or not, you individually were responsible. They actually implemented individual responsibility and made it positive for everybody. Our economy did not take a hit when that happened. We need to reverse the debt culture, and that's primarily what I want to do. So funneling everything that we do directly through Washington needs to be, at the minimum, block grants back to the states so we can allow and make it so states have the autonomy to do more efficient type of decision making. And that needs to go from healthcare to education across the board. Allowing for states to be able to exist in a competitive environment. Granted, we're all unified in our nation, but allowing for them to be able to, some states are going to constantly learn from Utah about how we go about doing this and being able to communicate that. So I touched on healthcare before, social security, raising the age. All those ideas need to be on the table.
We're past the halfway point in this debate today between the primary candidates in Utah's 1st Congressional District, the Republican candidates. Let's move on now to a different topic. Let's talk about foreign policy. I want to ask each of you candidates, who do you think is the biggest foreign threat to the U.S. right now and why? Each of you will have 1 minute, and we begin with Katie Witt.
Thank you. China. The answer is China. And I think that they pose the greatest international threat. We have assumed over the past many decades that by doing trade with them, they would adopt our economic system, and that has not been the case. We have seen them be currency manipulators. They have been dishonest about COVID-19. And I think that what we really need is a grand strategy, which we have not done since the Cold War. And one of the things that we absolutely have to do is we need to have a nationwide industrial internet that protects our innovators and our producers so that their intellectual property is safe. So China is absolutely the biggest threat to the United States.
Mr. Gibson.
China, with Russia and the Middle East close behind. Here's the thing, my friends. We have real challenges when it comes to foreign adversaries. And the reality is when they control us in many, many ways. When they control our currency, when they control our debt, which is part of the thing that we just discussed with our fiscal challenges, when they control our food production, our natural resources, they control everything around us. We are only great today as a nation because we controlled those things in the past, because we learned to produce our own food and fiber, because we don't have to depend upon them for the most basic of our needs. We're only strong today because we produced our own natural resources, and because we controlled our intellectual property rights, and because we provided for a strong national defense. So I subscribe to the theory of Reagan where we talk about peace through strength. We have to put our strong step forward and make sure that we control the things that are important for us so that we can be strong in the world stage.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, the GOP legislature recently convened a task force, and I wish they would let candidates be on that task force. We're served well by Congressman Stewart and Curtis on that. But this is my wheelhouse. This is something that I'm very excited about. It's become a topic because there's a real opportunity to take advantage of and make real change here. I won't go through all the issues. They've been mentioned, but maintaining a productive relationship with China by leveraging international community will be hugely important here. And we have now the momentum to be able to do that. The entire world has been affected by this virus, and we need to take advantage of those relationships. One, strengthen ourselves. Strengthen our own manufacturing capability. That will put the fear in China that we're going to be able to do a lot of this on our own. And moving on to ensure that they acknowledge that the virus's origin, get rid of the wet markets, regulate that to be able to increase transparency among their government, support Taiwan as an observer in the World Health Organization, promote human rights, Hong Kong. We can't let that happen to Taiwan. That's just recently happened. Smart tariffs are going to be allowed to be trade policy, and no knee-jerk reactions, but just build better relationships with other countries with different alternatives.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, number one, China. There's no question. China, basically, the way they're warring is they're after the economics of the world. They want to take over the economics. We have to make sure that we stay strong as the number one nation in this world. Part of the things that I believe we have to do is right now we all learned through this COVID-19 experience that there are many drugs that are made in China, drugs that we essentially need to use throughout our lives, that we need to get those jobs back home here. We need to get the production of those products here in this country. Number two is Russia. Russia is going to be more of a warring country. They're the ones that basically becomes the violence type of problem that you would have with them. And I think that we have to make sure we continue to be strong in NATO. We have to continue to be strong with our allies to be able to do that. And I do believe that there's a third one that isn't talked about much, and I think that becomes our own country, that we don't implode within our own country. We have to be able to come together, work together to do what the forefathers wanted, and that's to continue to move this country along and to do it as a country, not as 2 or 3 different sides.
Mrs. Witt, you have a response on the China question and the greatest threat.
You know, just listening to Blake's response, what he's advocating for is the same old, same old. We can't continue to do the same old, same old. It doesn't work. We need to do something different, and we need to be strategic about it, because just expecting them to come along with us, that's not working. You got to do something else. That's it.
John, would you like a response to that?
Of course,
Mr.
yeah.
Moore?
The key is
30
listening
seconds.
here. The key is listening here. Every bullet point that I just did laid out a very strategic approach that we are not necessarily doing right now. We're not bolstering up our own manufacturing to instill a better option so we don't have to continue to rely on China with so much of that. Everything that I've laid out is sound policy that is now leveraging what we've gone through and incorporating the international community, because we have not had that type of support. I served our country in Asia, traveling in and out of China, trusted with America's intelligence. This is something that I'm very excited to be involved with.
Mr. Gibson and then Mr. Stevenson. Mr. Gibson.
Thank you. I'll just add, if there's something we've learned from this whole COVID crisis, it's the interrelationship between us as individuals on the world stage. And that this type of thing actually is an economic issue. And I just remind you, the fact that we have learned now that there are some things that maybe we haven't paid attention to in the past. That's a good thing. We have taken our food production, I'm going to hammer on this a little bit, but we've taken it for granted for so long that we forgot that it actually could be a problem. It could be a problem if our farmers and ranchers don't succeed, if the distribution system doesn't succeed, and it is a problem because it's our most basic need. All of these things work together. We have to pay attention to all of them.
All right, Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, Mr. Moore, the thing I want to point out to you is that we're a world economy, and part of that world economy is that this world produces goods and services, and they are traded amongst them, and it has to be fair. The thing that I believe we have to do here in this country is not get everything out of China. We have to get the essential things out of China, those types of items that we need to make sure they are produced right here in our country, so if the day does come that all of a sudden the missiles start going and the bombs start dropping, that we aren't dependent upon a country that we're warring with and not able to get the goods that we need.
Yeah, exactly the first point that I made on strengthening ourselves and making sure that we have the capability to manufacture. What happened when COVID-19 hit? We were able to flip over a car manufacturer to make ventilators. We showed that we can do that, and we need to continue to do that because that will continue to put pressure and make sure that we're safe.
All right, let's move on to a different topic now. Let's talk about cybersecurity, a key issue in this country today, as we've talked about China and other countries along the line. And a question coming to us on social media, and that question is, what role should Congress play in safeguarding the nation's digital infrastructure, dependent as we are on it for defense, information, and commerce? And we begin with Katie Witt.
Thank you. And I think that what I mentioned is that I believe we do need to have an industrial, secure internet for our businesses and our military that cannot be hacked by outside forces. That's essential, and we do need. That's intellectual property, and it is government's responsibility to protect that.
And Mr. Gibson.
It's part of the new frontier. We absolutely must protect our intellectual property rights. I spoke with a delegate on the phone here a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, who shared with me that his job and his entire purpose in life right now, with all this difficulty, is to protect financial institutions from the challenges that they face when it comes to these hackers and these people who would steal that intellectual property right and frankly destroy us financially. It's no different than stealing something out of a grocery store or looting a 7-Eleven. We have to make sure that we protect those assets that we have, and it is part of the new frontier. It's the way that China is attacking us now. It's not just China. It's Russia. It's Iran. It's many of our adversaries. But again, we can't forget the things that we protected in the past. Like we've got to keep track of we've got to keep up with our national defense. Our airplanes and our Hill Air Force Base is critical. Those things are critical. But we also need to look at the new frontier as well and protect our borders, protect ourselves in many ways.
Mr. Stevenson, what should we do to safeguard the nation's infrastructure? Mr. Stevenson.
Sure. We without a doubt have got to continue to update, improve what our cybersecurity is. It's one of those things to where if you take the new F-35 that a lot of us see now, is that if you look at the MiG that has been produced in China, it's very similar. They aren't able to do the exact stuff that we are, but they stole the information from it in the process of trying to build this. We have to stop that, and we have to be willing to step forward. One of the problems we run into is it becomes also the privacy. Are people looking and listening to some of us private citizens? And that becomes a very fine line that we have to protect our rights still in this country. But we have to be able to correct that problem and shut it down and stop this indirect spying and buying information from us. One of the things that we can look at very simply was 4 years ago now as to where there was influence with what has been said within the election process. These are not things that can happen, and we have to stop them as quickly as possible.
Mr. Moore.
What we're talking about here is a switch from human intelligence, human to SIGINT, human intelligence to signal intelligence. This is a key transition in our espionage and in our intelligence community. Seeing this firsthand, I've seen what Chinese hackers, Chinese infiltrators can do, and it's definitely what we need to be protecting ourselves against going forward. I'm glad that we've brought up Hill Air Force Base. Coupled with education, that's an area that we can actually be thinking and being forward-leaning on how important it is to invest in our education efforts to train the engineers to be able to go and combat the foreign adversaries that we're going to be facing in this regard. Hill Air Force Base has an awesome opportunity. They're doing a ton of it right now. The 309th SWAG, they're training our software engineers. We're using our Davis Tech and other institutions to build up our engineers. Like, we have to be able to invest in our STEM education. So there's a direct line to be able to do that and be able to protect our national defense.
There is no doubt in this country today that partisanship and divisiveness is certainly there. I want to give each of you 30 seconds to respond to this question, but give me one or two examples of where you would be willing to work across the aisle and get something done for the American people. We begin with Mr. Gibson. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Again, this is one of those opportunities where I can speak from experience. I've sat in the state legislature on one side of the aisle and maintained wonderful friendships on the other side of the aisle. sometimes we agreed on the policy, but when we didn't, we always treated each other with respect and dignity. Some of my Democratic colleagues on the other side of the aisle are the people and the relationships that I treasure the most, having left the state legislature now. And so I have a history of being able to do that, both in the state level, and I'll be able to do that at the federal level as well. When I look at friends of mine that have become lifelong friends, like Representative Seelig from Salt Lake City, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to spend time with her and learn, because at the end of the day, she cares about our country too. She just gets about it in a different way.
All right, let's move on to the next response, and it comes to us from Mr. Moore.
Yeah, this is every day of my life, working with people with a diversity of thought. Politics is the only place in the world where a diversity of thought doesn't actually help you get to a better conclusion, and we need to embrace that fully in what we're doing. Well, you asked to specifically answer your question, economy. Absolutely the economy. We need to be thinking together. We need to think of bipartisan or nonpartisan approaches to how to improve our economy, and a lot of times that's going to be for Congress to take a step back and let our small businesses get back to work.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, when I served as mayor of Layton, there were many, many things that we accomplished in that town during that 5-year period. And when I was asked, what is the most major thing you did? It was I kept my council together. We worked in unity. We learned how to be a body that complained, that questioned, but when it came to it, we went back together. This is the same attitude that has to happen on either side of the aisle. Mr. Gibson, I'm going to just make one comment to you as far as your legislative experience. What was there? 6 Democrats on the other side? Could you even see them? That is a true statement as far as that goes. So.
Absolutely.
All right. We need to hear from Mrs. Witt.
You know, I feel that politics is about getting everybody swimming in the same direction in the swimming pool. I'll work with anybody who wants to preserve freedom, expand opportunity, and reignite patriotism. But sometimes you got to stand up and not move. And when it comes to an issue on principle, I will not be moved. However, on things like roads and bridges and all these other things, I can get at that any other way, but on principles, I'll stand pat.
Candidates, thank you very much. We have reached the end of our allotted time for questions from the candidates. We now move to the 1-minute closing statements this afternoon. Prior to airtime, it was determined that Mr. Blake Moore would have the first 1-minute opportunity. Mr. Moore.
I'm sure my colleagues here on stage have heard something similar along the way that a lot of people, but I was a little surprised to have heard how many people actually said to you, I'm just glad you're willing to run. Now, they say it a lot in jest. I think there's a joking nature to that. But for me, it's reinforced how this has been the best decision. This has been the right decision for me. But it's also been very encouraging. The only encouragement that I needed, though, was when I decided to run and I texted a mentor of mine. His response was all I needed to hear. And he said, Blake, I am so excited that you're willing to run. This gives me hope for my grandkids. Elections are about the future, and there's never been a more important election than what we have right now. We need to expect more out of Congress. We need more dynamic leadership in Congress, and I have the right experience to be able to go back and be a force for good. I ask for your support in this primary to be successful in November and then go make that change.
Mr. Stevenson, you have 1 minute.
Yes, I was raised by an educator. My father served education for over 30 years, and he taught us principles. He taught us Utah values. He taught us to give service to others. He taught us to be honest, to have integrity. And I think that one of the most important things that he taught us to do, not only to work, but he taught us to respect our name. We were Stevensons, and we were expected to behave and do the things that we should as he had taught us as kids. We pass that along with our family, with what my kids are doing at this time. These are the type of things that when you get into these leadership positions, that you have to remember you are respecting and representing the people that you're serving. And as you do it, you do have to have that attitude of service. You have to have that attitude of integrity, of honesty, and also the fact that you're willing to listen and learn. I have always, in all my elections, believed that I ran for office to serve, not to get reelected. Thank you.
Katie Witt.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to the Utah Debate Commission. I believe this is the last debate. Thank you for your work. I also want to thank you at home for taking the time to watch and listen. I am pro-life, I am pro-gun, I am pro-Trump, but mostly I am pro-you. I will work tirelessly to preserve freedom, expand opportunity, reignite patriotism, and I have received the endorsements of the American Conservative Union as well as the Susan B. Anthony List, which is the premier pro-life group here in the United States. America's best days are yet to come, and I am looking forward to the American frontier led by our small business owners, our innovators, our entrepreneurs, and we need to reopen America, and we need you in this fight. Join me in this fight. Patriots assemble.
Mr. Gibson.
Rod, candidates, thank you so much for a good debate. I appreciate that very much. My friends, now is not the time for on-the-job training. During these challenging times, we need strong and steady leadership that has been tested by the trials and the difficulties that make us strong. I have a proven conservative track record of exactly that, such as standing up for the right to life, protecting our Second Amendment rights, and fighting for our constitutional liberties. Again, the easy decisions have already been made. If we are truly going to balance our budget, protect Hill Air Force Base, and ensure that we have a seat at the table when it comes to our public lands debate in this state, we need to have someone that will stand on principle and that has a record of making those tough decisions. One thing is for sure. If you elect me to be your representative, I will be able to go to work on day one defending those constitutional principles that we hold dear. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Candidates, thank you very much. Thank you. We thank all of you and the candidates for this informative debate tonight, sponsored by the Utah Debate Commission. Enjoy the afternoon.
were a bad combination there for a minute. Catch my breath.
So this is your opportunity to tell us how you think the debate went, and what your experience was like, what you learned, what you might take with you in the campaign.
Okay.
You can address it straight to that camera there.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the Utah Debate Commission for the tremendous debate that we had today. It was well organized. I think the technology went off appropriately and correctly. I felt comfortable with the social distancing and the precautions that were taken around the COVID response. And I also was grateful for, I think, a robust and good discussion among candidates. I think that's what we really need in this race, is an opportunity for candidates to lay out not only their vision, but their experience and qualifications that will make them the type of congressman that will represent Utah for years to come. This is one of those circumstances where our last congressman was there for 18 years. Before that, it was 22 years. In 2 decades now, we've had 2 congressmen from this district, people from this district. And we need to be prepared to replace that seniority with someone who can hit the ground running on day one and truly make a difference representing our state. This district is crucially important for the entire state. As you know, it's not necessarily a swing district. And what that means is it allows for this person to show real leadership in Washington, D.C., to be able to step out on issues that are critical and important, and be able to show leadership and do things that might not be able to be done in other districts. And so I'm grateful to have had some opportunities and experiences in my life that I think have prepared me well to offer that kind of representation. And I look forward to standing up for the people in this district and throughout the state and truly making a difference for them as we move forward. I will just say this in closing and then take any questions, but one of the best parts for me about public service, in fact, I would say the best part, has been the opportunity that I've had to get to know people and to work with them. We talked about bipartisanship down on the floor a minute ago, and I'm grateful to see Senator Hale, who I consider one of my dearest friends from my time in the legislature. I'm grateful for her dedication to our community. But getting to know them and working for them, some of my best accomplishments and the things that I'm the most grateful for were the times when I was able to hear someone's story and take their story into the halls of the state legislature and be able to fight for them when no one else was fighting for them. That's why I want to serve. In addition to the fact that I have an obligation to those who have sacrificed for me to make sure that my freedoms were maintained, and I want to do the same for them. So thank you for a great debate. Thank you to all of you for your participation. I know that there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes on to make all this happen. You're here pounding away on the computer and taking care of the technical details that so many people miss and take for granted sometimes. And so I give you my true thanks for your willingness to serve. And last but not least, when you're on the campaign trail, it is tough. Sometimes there's a lot of things, a lot of pressures, and I want to thank my sweet wife, Katrina, who couldn't be with me on the debate floor. She's too beautiful to be hiding behind that mask, but I am so grateful for her and the support and comfort that she gives me when she's with me. Katrina, you have made the difference for me. Thank you so much.
Any reporter questions out there? We had one that came in on social media that wanted to know about your views on balancing land use with development, how you would approach that problem in Congress.
Land use with development.
Preserving land, using land.
Oh. Okay. Well, in all honesty, that sounds like a local issue to me and a state issue. It's something that I've dealt with in my experience as a county commissioner and as a state legislator, but we ought to drive land use decisions closer to home. I'm a firm believer in the concept of federalism, which means that there's just a few enumerated duties and responsibilities of the federal government, and most of the others are much more effectively addressed at the local and state level. Now, granted, counties and municipalities are subdivisions of the state, and frankly, the state has the sovereign responsibility in those cases. But any time that we can push, even from a state level, that decision-making process into the local levels, we are so grateful for that, because it makes more sense. But what it is related to, and I'm going to tie it into something that I'm passionate about, is the fact that we live in a state where 70% of our land is owned by the federal government, nearly 70% of our land. And I think that principle holds true in that case as well. We need to be more actively involved in the state of Utah in managing the affairs of our public lands and our federal lands. And I think we have made great strides over the last few years, where the federal government is now understanding that state governments and local governments, local county commissioners, truly do have a seat at the table and truly do have a lot to offer when it comes to the management of our federal lands within our state. So that's something that I'm going to push for if I'm fortunate enough to be elected as your congressman. I'm going to make sure that we recognize that local management is a key part of the federal land policy debate. And I'm prepared to be an active and willing participant in that process from day one, as any congressman should be from this district who comes from a state where nearly 70% of our land is owned by the federal government.
There was another earlier question from social media that wanted to know your thoughts on Roe v. Wade overturning abortion, women's right to privacy. What would you say to that?
I'm 100% pro-life. I believe that it's important for us to value all life, whether it's the life of each and every one of us, the life of the elderly, or the life of those not yet born. And so I would support the type of judges that our president has nominated in the past that believe in the sanctity of life, not only on adults, but with the unborn as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all your hard work out here.
This is your opportunity to tell us how you felt the debate went and your impressions of the event, which you might take with you into the campaign from this experience.
Yeah, great. I felt like it went great. I love these opportunities. It's a really important part of the campaign process. Great to be in person with people. But again, I felt it went really great. I felt I was able to communicate my responses. It's always tough. How do you fit it into 2 minutes? Or how do you fit it into 30 seconds or a minute? And I felt I was able to do that, of course. So it was a great experience. Again, we did this a little bit during the convention, garnering a lot of interest and support, and it's something that's been really important to our campaign.
We had one social media question that came in late that we didn't get to. Wanted to know about the importance of living within the district.
Yeah, right. And then the notion of this question is if I understand the district, if I understand the first district, and it's absurd. I do. I've proven that through this campaign. I've proven, by legitimately and to really earning a spot on this ballot with my ideas and how I go about communicating my sincere desire to serve. Been able to convince people of that. But I'm from Ogden. Anybody from Ogden knows that never leaves you. And we can't continue to forget the whole eastern part of our district. That part of our district is hugely important, and they get forgotten far too often, right? So what we have here is, I entered this race because I knew I had the right experience. And all that aside, everything associated with that, the framers of our Constitution knew that we needed to send the most qualified, that each state needs to send their most qualified individuals back and their most qualified representation. And that's why I got in this race, because I believe that my experience, it's unique, and it directly applies to the job of Congress, and I'm giving the voters that chance. And I really, if as voters consider this, knowing about who I am, watching the debate, and hearing my ideas, people are willing to that. That's what I care about.
We had another question that came in on social media that asked about federal lands and usage of lands and preserving those lands. How would you balance that equation?
Yeah, I wish we could have gotten into more of that with the debates. A really productive part of our conversation. This is hugely important to the first district. What we need to do is continue with the momentum that we've seen recently with the wins that Congressman Bishop has been able to secure and build on that momentum. And right now we have an opportunity to do so. We've seen how our federal government, and we've seen it become a phenomenon. We have to open up our economy. Here's some guidelines. Here's some best practices. Here's some research that we've got for you. Now, governors, go and do it. Like, that exists now. The 10th Amendment, Ronald Reagan's new federalism, everything now we're talking about has been about this importance of states' rights. Utah can manage our lands so well. Like, fire prevention is a clear example of how well we can do that. But we got to remember that Utah is at a big disadvantage, and other states don't get it. And how can we communicate that to others? The first thing we need to do to communicate that is, I would say, over-communicate our commitment to conservation. How much we benefit from conservation, how much Utahns care about conservation, our beautiful sceneries, landscapes, national parks. Like, we want to make sure that those have an enormously long future in our country. That's a part of my heritage. My great-grandfather, ran things in Zion. He was the first one to build a tram and found Phantom Ranch down in the southern part into Grand Canyon as well. But we have to recognize that it's about balance. So agriculture is the biggest priority here with respect to public lands. But we also have a limiting factor with water. Recreation, energy diversity, these things can coexist, and we just need to be able to make the decisions at the state level.
And another question that a viewer submitted was your position on the Second Amendment and balancing safety, especially in our schools, with the right to bear arms.
Yep, right. We need to enforce the laws that we have. But the role of government is not to grant rights, it's to protect those rights. And so I'm fully supportive of the Second Amendment. I even talk about on my website about we can't make this a gun debate. We can't make this about being a pro-gun debate, because then that draws in attacks. Everybody agrees about the ability to protect ourselves. Everybody needs to be able to have access. Responsible citizens need to be able to have access to weapons to guns or arms that criminals could have access to. But no one cares more about school safety than me. I have 3 young boys that are entering into that world right now. One's a first grader, and the other ones are going right into it soon. That is a key priority, and I'll make sure that we can we can balance that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks. That was really weird talking to you.
I know.
I couldn't get over that the whole time.
Zoom, I hate that word. Zoom.
You're over it?
Well, this is your opportunity to tell us your impressions of the experience of the debate. What do you think went well? What you might take with you into your later campaign?
Sure. You ready? We're appreciative of putting the debate on. It's one of those things that not everyone does, and to be able to step forward and give us an opportunity. As we've gone through this COVID-19 situation, it's really curtailed the ability for us to campaign and involved with people. And so to be able to do this and have some airtime as far as it goes, I think really helps all of us, all the candidates, to be able to share their story and be able to have the people get to know you a little bit better. As far as some things that I think that I would have liked to seen as far as the debate goes, I do believe there should have been more discussion about the rural situation as far as the public lands goes. It's very important, I think, in this northern Utah, northeastern Vernal area, Uinta County area, is that agriculture is a big thing. And it's one of the economic engines that's helped runs this state. And I do think it's very important that we talk about it and we be able to discuss it a little bit. I think the other thing, too, that became very important was also dealing with the aspect of the economy, especially where Hill Air Force Base comes in, and I think that we all have to realize the importance of the base, not only in the aspect of the military support, but also the $3.7 billion that it puts into the economy of our state as far as that goes. So with that, I thought it was an absolutely wonderful experience, and I appreciate the time and effort that everyone put in on it.
Well, let me ask you to elaborate a little more on public lands and agriculture. How do we balance conservation and exploitation of public lands?
Sure. I think the thing on the public lands that we have to be aware of is that presently there's multi uses for the public lands, whether we're talking recreation, whether we're talking grazing, whether we're talking the mining, whether we're talking the beauty. It's something that is there, and we have to make sure that within the state that we protect that. On top of that, though, the thing that has to be looked at is the PILT funding, if you're familiar with that, the payment in lieu of taxes that the federal government brings in. The state as a whole is about, I think, 61% federal lands with the latest figures I've seen. If you get out into the basin area, I believe Vernal has about 40% public lands. I think Daggett County, I think, is around 80% public lands, and these PILT funds are very important to come into these counties. Each county receives basically a per acre dollar figure that comes in. It varies from all of them. Some are as high as, I think, $2.27 per acre, whereas a short one would be, say, Morgan County, which is 40 cents per acre. And I believe that this is one of the things that we have to do as an elected official, is to be able to try to draw this together and make this become an ongoing process, not a process that every year you have to have it renewed as far as that goes.
What do you feel comfortable with Congress, federal government and its participation in agriculture. What should farm policy be?
Well, I think that a couple of things that go into agriculture that is important. One becomes labor. We have to realize that as we've gone through this immigration issue over the past few years, that it is very important that labor comes up and helps the agricultural purpose. That's in the orchards, that's in the dairy business, that's in the hoeing the onions, the beans, the beets as far as the field goes. And these seasonal workers are still under that problem of trying to make sure they can get across the border. I think we have to shore up the ability for these agricultural organizations, the companies, the families, to be able to continue to sponsor these workers to come up to where they come up year after year and be able to supply that labor. I think the other thing that gets involved is water. We all know in the state of Utah right now, as we grow and become more and more people, that there's more and more water usage. We have to make sure that we preserve and we protect those water rights for those agricultural purposes and not turn around and especially let them go into any other state than the state of Utah.
So when you're thinking about Colorado River Compact and how that water is divided up, where do you think Congress should be involved in that process?
Well, you know, of course, Congress as a whole is going to look at the whole pack with what is there. I think we in the state, as far as the water that is going through our state, that we're also utilizing. I mean, I know that there's right now the push to run the pipeline from Lake Powell over into the St. George, Washington County, which is very important because Washington County is almost out of water as far as that goes with any new growth. And I think that part of what we as a delegation, if I'm able to get elected, that we have to be able to do is work together. This isn't just about northern Utah. This becomes about the state as a whole with these types of rights, especially with water, that we protect and we make sure that we are protecting our land before we let this go other places.
I think you mentioned your dad was a teacher. Was that correct?
My father actually was a principal at Davis High School for 27 years.
So what do you believe a proper role of the federal government is in education at the secondary and the university level?
On that, I think that especially as far as state goes, I think the federal government needs to get out of education. I think that they're realistically, when it comes down to it, there is no better person to know exactly what to do with education than that teacher. That teacher is the one who's been trained, who understands the personalities in the classroom and knows how to get through to those students, and we have to allow that to happen. I do believe on the university level, one of the things that we can take Utah State as an example, in their space technology, they have up there, I believe, over 1,000 employees. There is a lot of federal funds that have to be supported to Utah State to be able to keep these programs going, because they are research programs and they are things that are there that is helping not just Logan area, Cache County area, northern Utah. They're helping the entire country with some of the things that they're doing. Some of the information and some of the things they're learning and some of the things they're researching are very proprietary and are classified to things that we don't even know what's going on. And there has to continue to be that federal aid to support that program.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Yes, probably. Darn it. 5'2", you know.
Well, we'd like your reaction to the participating in the debate.
Wasn't that fun?
What the experience was like for you, and what you may take with you into the campaign.
You know, I thought it was really fun, and I really appreciated that there was opportunity to go back and forth a little bit. So I thought it was fun.
Is there something that you wish would have come out that didn't?
So many things. First of all, we didn't get to talk too much about the rural issues, and because of the nature of our district, so much of it is rural, and especially the basin. I'm concerned about the basin and making sure that we are cognizant of the need to have good transportation, roads to get in and out. We also absolutely need to work towards getting a rail system so we can get oil and gas out of the basin. We also need additional industries to be in the basin to allow people to live where they want to live. And part of that is going to be super fast internet. We need to have super fast internet everywhere, especially rural areas, so that people can live where they want to live and still be able to fully participate in the worldwide economy.
We've seen the coal industry, for instance, suffer as power suppliers have moved away from coal. Do you think that's something that might affect the basin area with its high sulfur crude oil, that it might become not cost effective to use that energy source? And should there be federal involvement in encouraging use of those fuels?
You know, I think what we need is a diversity of industries in the basin, and I don't know. What I love about the basin is that they're helping us be energy independent. We need to continue to be energy independent. I think it's a national security issue. So as far as the grade of oil that comes out of there, I couldn't speak to that, but I think that we need to continue to federal government's responsibility is set the table for what we want to see happen, right? It's not to force or anything like that, but when it comes to transportation dollars, I think that has a big impact in making sure that we are able to meet the needs of folks out in the basin.
You made your support of President Trump quite clear, especially in the
Yes.
debate. What is it that is it part of his agenda that attracts you?
You know, I think that President Trump is different than any other president that I can remember. And there's three things I really like. Okay, first of all, he has been really strong on the pro-life issue, which is very important to me and many other people. Second thing, I mentioned in the debate the fact that he actually is removing barriers for small businesses, for industry, for our people involved in natural resources to be able to do their jobs. And I really love that. I appreciate that. And that's what we're going to need as we move into the new frontier. We need more of that. So we have the rules and regulations that make sense, but no more than that. The third thing that I appreciate about President Trump is his strong stance on China. And nobody has been able to see China for what they are as clearly as President Trump. And I think that we have potentially 4 more years of President Trump. China's in this for the long game, and we need to have a strategy in place so that we can deal long term with China. And so I appreciate President Trump's leadership on that.
I think I read somewhere where China educates 100 times more engineers every year than the United States does. What do you think we should be doing about that?
We need to be our states need to be investing in STEM education, and I think we are. I believe education belongs at the hyper-local level. So families first, then your locality. I don't think that it's federal responsibility. However, when it comes to setting the table, as I've mentioned, we we do want to make sure that we have, we're growing our own engineers right here, so that they can have the great jobs that are available here in the United States.
Well, on education more broadly, what role should the federal government play in
Less.
K-12 and in university level?
Less. I think that nobody cares about our kids as much as we care about our kids. And I love the idea of multiple things. Number one, I think I love the system that we have where states can invent and figure out what works best for them. I love that. But as we have seen through coronavirus, there is a new frontier opening with education, and we might be able to do a hybrid of online and in person, and we're going to actually have to do that as we reopen our schools. The idea of an a la carte education model is really exciting to me, so that parents could choose the right teacher for the right subject for their kid is really exciting. And I think it's possible, and I think we've proved that through coronavirus. And shout out to all the teachers who have worked so hard to be creative and engage those kids through this time, and it's inspiring to see what they've been able to do. Now with higher ed, this is going to be interesting. I want to see prices come down on education, because I think we've proved that we can get a really good education and you don't have to take up space in a room. You know, you can be at your desk in your home and learning. I think there are cost savings to be realized here, and I think it might be we can bring down the prices of tuition.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, awesome. That was easy.